I think one of the most important things that is lost, maybe people never realized it fully, was that when a man and woman give themselves to each other in marriage, a new reality comes into existence. That marriage is a new reality, just like a child
Yeah.
that comes into existence.
In the sense that you and I have a very unique relationship because you are my father. I would not exist if it weren't for you. And I come directly from you, but you're essentially forming a bond like that in a marriage.
That's absolutely right.
And that's not replaceable.
The marriage bond is a new reality that cannot go out of existence until death. So two things here. One, when a person receives an annulment, it doesn't mean they had a marriage and it was brought to an end. It means an annulment means there never was a marriage in the first place.
So maybe that's too complicated to ask. What are those situations in which it's not valid?
Oh, well, there are things that each person needs to bring to the table in order for the marriage to be valid. So one of them is that you're free, that you can't be under duress to enter into the marriage. Secondly, that you intend to have children would be another one. It's the three parts of the marriage vow.
If you were going to marry someone, assuming that other person had the desire to have children, and then that person was like, absolutely not.
It wouldn't be a valid marriage.
Oh, interesting.
Thirdly, if you entered without the intent of permanence. So you got to be free. You got to have the intent of permanence. You got to have the intent of fidelity. You have to have the intent of having and raising children. If you don't bring those to the table, or if there was something that prevented you from bringing those to the table, the altar, we should say the altar, then you didn't bring the elements, the characteristics that were necessary to make it a valid marriage. And the church with the annulment does an investigation. If it sees those necessary elements were missing, then it declares that the marriage was null and void. There was never a marriage, which now that means you're free to marry somebody else.
Yeah.
But once there's a marriage, it's a reality that can't go out of existence until one of the spouses die.
So a nuclear family can still exist in the case of either a proper annulment, or would you say?
Well, in a proper annulment, there was never a marriage,
But
so there was
also,
never a family.
Does
However,
this apply in the same case of, say, your spouse passes, but you have multiple kids with that person, and you have a new family? Wouldn't you still call that a blended family if you marry someone else and have kids with that person?
yeah, you would call it a.
But it's also still a traditional family.
Correct. It's still a
I see.
traditional family. But I want to go back to your question. How would I answer? What about people who are in situations? Because we have a lot of men and women who are in single parent families. What about them? I would say that they have many elements of the family, but they're not the fullness of family life as God designed it. And if they're in that situation, especially if against their will, or they can't fix it, or they can't change it, they shouldn't despair. God will provide for them in their lack.
That's hard. I think that's a difficult one to wrap my mind around, and I'd be interested to hear from people in those situations. But obviously, marriage and family in the first place is complicated.
Is it complicated, or is it that?
I mean, complicated in the sense of things might be simple, but it doesn't make it any less upsetting.
Well, for sure. But I'm glad you used that word. You always use the right words. It's upsetting because we're missing something we know should be there, which points us back to the design by God. It's upsetting because maybe we're missing the husband or the wife, the mother, the father, the child. Something's missing, and that's why it's upsetting. And that points us back to the model.
That's a lot to think about.
That's why it's a meditation. But I love your questions. I love the conversation. And we're going to be digging into a lot of these things as we go forward with this series of meditations on the fourth commandment. So thank you.
Thank you.
Well, let's be apostles of friendship, good conversation, and the Rosary. Share this with others.